Welcome to Integrity Data Advanced Time and Attendance. Today's tutorial is going to be going over the PTO accrual setup. So to get to our PTO accruals, we're going to go to Configuration and PTO Plans. And you can see I've got some in here already, but we want to add another one perhaps. So we'll click Add New PTO Plan. Now, when determining how many PTO plans you need, it kind of depends on the types of employees that you have. Maybe your company only has PTO and sick, but for year 1 through year 2, salary employees get a higher amount than hourly employees do. In that instance, I would set up 2 plans, one for hourly employees and one for salary employees, and then go in and build their accruals based on their specific rates for the type of employee that they are. You may have employees that get PTO and sick, and then you may just have part-time employees that only get sick. So in that instance, you would need 2 different plans, one for PTO and sick, and then another plan just for sick. So the first thing you need to do is add a code. These are my codes over here that I currently have. I just need to use something different. I like to use a numeric hierarchical plan here, but honestly, you could use whatever numbers you wanted, whatever combination numbers and letters you wanted, as long as they are different from your other plans currently set up. I'll add 400 and hourly employees. Now, I'm going to choose the plan specific to these types of employees, PTO and sick. First column here is default hours. I'm going to say that we're going to give the employee 5 hours right out of the gates when we hire them. And that's what this does. As soon as I hire a new employee, add them in and click save, it's going to put 5 hours of PTO time in their bank. Most people do not use this, but that's what this is for. Maximum hours, I'm always going to come in here and put 9999. So that frees me up to apply as much PTO as I want to an individual without being restricted by a maximum hour amount. Minimum request, some companies may say that you have to request your blocks in at least a minimum of 2 hours or 4 hours or 8 hours whenever requesting PTO, and that's what this is used for. Most people will leave this at 0. Allow negative balance. If I have an employee that has 6 hours in their PTO bank and they request 8 hours off, if their bank allows negative, I can then approve that request for the employee to get it. If it's not checked, then it will not allow that request to go through if it exceeds the amount of their balance. So that's what we use here with the allow negative balance. Allow for employee timesheet. If this is checked, that means if your employees use the timesheet entry, where they go in and choose their start time, their stop time, the number of hours, the pay type, maybe they're doing this for each day at the end of the week, then checking this would also allow them to insert 4 hours of PTO or 8 hours of PTO without the need for approval. If you still want those types of employees to have their PTO or time approved before it goes to their timesheet, you would not select this. Ignore or deduct approved PTOs on import. This is only utilized if you're importing balances. Some companies may not want to have accruals set up, so they just import their balances monthly by the pay period or yearly. And what this is for is, maybe if I'm importing balances at the end of each pay period from another application, do I want that balance I'm importing to automatically be that balance regardless of what the employee has in the future? Or do I want their future approved requests to be deducted from the balance I am importing? Most time that's going to be not utilized because only a few companies will import their balances. So we don't really need to worry about this as far as that goes. So once I have this set up, I've got my code, my description, my basics set up in here. I'm going to save this. I'm not going to go any further yet. I want to save this as it is so that it adds it in. That ensures that I've put everything in there correctly, or at least what the application was expecting. Next, I'm going to click Edit on this to continue. And what I want to do is enable the PTO accrual. This is where it'll allow us to go in and set up the accrual rates. X amount per month, X amount per hour worked, X amount per year, and so forth. So I'm going to select here. I'm going to leave this alone. Even if it's annually, I'm just going to leave this right now and not mess with it. I scroll all the way over to the right, and now under PTO accrual configuration, I can click View, and that brings up the ability to set up the PTO accruals. Apply max benefit year accrual. This could be used if your accrual rate is not perfect. Maybe it's something like 2.67, and that equates to, let's say, 40.020 hours or 40.2 hours per year. We can choose to use the apply max benefit year accrual. And as we set up the policy, set in our 40 hours. That way, even though you're not perfect on the 2.67, it will stop at 40 hours. Now, this is also useful for sick, especially in California, Arizona, and Washington, places that may say, okay, they get 1 hour for every 30 hours worked, but they can only get a maximum of 40 hours per year. So that would be extremely beneficial in that case if that's how time is accrued for you. We'll leave the method at time of service. We can accrue the time from their hire date, or we could use the anniversary date in their employee details or their benefit date. We can start the benefit on their hire date, their anniversary date, or their benefit date. So you have the option to mix and match here. Accrue overtime. This is if you're using hours worked to give benefits. So most people really won't use this, but there may be some unions or companies that do allow an employee to accrue PTO or sick and use their overtime hours as well as their regular worked hours to factor in on how much they get. Same with the percentage of what they work, minimum, full month hours, and whatnot. Exclude pay types on accruals. This is important if your employee is getting X amount of hours per hour worked. If we look here, we can exclude certain pay types that they're given from that. Maybe we've already determined that for the year, they get X amount based on 2,080 hours worked, or maybe they've factored in the fact that they get 40 hours of PTO. So they've chosen their accumulator based on 2,040 hours per year to give them their 40 hours. So in that instance, we would choose to exclude PTO so that they wouldn't end up with 43 hours for the year or something like that. So that's what our excluded pay type from accrual is for. Time of service unit. You can use year or month. I like to use month because it allows me to better add the PTO time of service details. I'm just better at using months than I am at years. Time unit. Right now, hours. So they would get X amount of time per hour worked. Or here, X amount of time per pay period, X amount of time per month, or X amount of time per year. So we'll just select pay period for this. I'm not worried about this here. We're going to click Add New PTO Time of Service Detail. Here we determine how much they get based on how long they've worked. Now, in months, 0 is counted as the first month, whereas in normal arithmetic, we start at 1 and go to 24 for 2 years. But in benefits, 0 is always the first month. So for 2 years, we would use 23. And they're going to earn, let's say, 2.67 every one pay period. That's our time unit. We're going to allow them to carry forward 20 hours, although in a first tier setup, they're really not going to have any carryover for the first year, but you have to remember this is for 2 years. How much do we want to allow them to carry over from year to year while they're on this accumulator? Maximum hours. This is the maximum hours that they can have in their bank at any one given time. So if I carried over 20 and I'm 3/4 of the way into my year and my bank is at 40, my accrual stops. It's different from this one because at this one, once I've reached 40 hours for the year, that accrual is not going to start back up. Here, this accrual would start back up if I took some time off and say my balance went down to 30 hours. Now my accrual can begin again, even though it's been a month. My accrual will start going. It's not going to give them back pay. It's just going to allow them to continue to accrue forward. A lot of use it or lose it type things are set up utilizing this. Most times I'm going to set up what their yearly accrual is plus what they're allowed to carry over. So we may do 60 hours here. Our max benefit year accrual is still going to be 40 because I don't want them going over 40 hours and I'm too lazy to go in and calculate to the 5th digit to get it perfect. So it's kind of a way to cheat. I'm going to go ahead and click save. And now I've got the first 2 years covered. Add new PTO again. It starts me off at month 24, which is the beginning month of year 3. And I might go to the end of year 4, which is going to be 47 months. And they might get 2.97256 every pay period. Remember, that's what we're doing here is every pay period. I cannot make switches. We can't go this year 3 through the end of year 4 is now suddenly annual. It's one or nothing, and it depends on this, and this time unit flows through on every accumulator you'll add in here. So I'm going to carry forward 40 hours because they get that for this amount of time. And we're going to say maybe 100 hours here. I'm not doing any math. I'm just guesstimating. Benefit year accrual, maybe they get 60 hours instead of 40. So get this added in and save. And you would continue on in that fashion until the end of your accumulators are reached. We'll go ahead and click save. And then I'm going to go over here and click save to make sure everything sticks. I got no errors, so that's good. Now, after I save that and I edit it, if those accumulators happen to be annually, I would then come in here and select annually and decide when to accrue it from a company accrual rollover date, from their benefit date and their details, their anniversary date, or their hire date. I would add those in and then save that. But we're going to stick with pay period close for this. And we're going to move on to our sick. So we're going to put a check mark in enable PTO accrual in our sick. I'm going to leave this alone, but I'm going to scroll over to the right because there's now the ability to do this. And when you're creating a policy, the reason I didn't check these when I created the policy is because that meant I would have had to have come in and set these up at that time. I didn't want to get all the way through it, then have an error and go and save and wipe out all of my work because I didn't do something right. So I like to do frequent saves while I'm setting things up, especially if I've got 23 of these that I'm going to be adding in. I might put 5, save it, and then come back over here and click save to make sure that I'm still doing things correctly so it doesn't wipe out all my work. Let's get back to our sick accrual right over here. I click view, and the same things apply up here. Max benefit based on, let's say, company annual accrual. Maybe it resets every year at the first of the year. Accrue from hire date, start on hire date, that's fine. Exclude pay types on accruals, and maybe you might want to let sick time accrue with overtime hours. It depends on your state rules or the company rules that you're going by. Exclude pay types on accruals for sick. I don't want them accruing on vacation time or personal time. I don't want them accruing for the sick time that they're taking. Maybe the others are fine. Maybe there's others in your setup that you may want to exclude as well. Then we just go ahead and click save. Time of service unit, again, this one's pretty easy. You could use year, but again, I stick to one and continue to use that. Every time unit, because the sick is 1 hour based on 30 hours worked, I'm using hour. I'm going to click add new PTO service detail from 0 month, and here I'm just going to do 9999, earn 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. You may allow a certain amount to be carried over from 1 year to another. Otherwise, you would just leave that at 0. The maximum they can have in their bank at any given time is going to be 40. So this is another use it or lose it. But remember, that doesn't mean it's going to stop at 40. It's taking their carry forward into consideration, whether it's 0 or an amount. It's taking into configuration what they currently have, or consideration what they currently have in their account. Now, if I go and take 3 days off, my balance goes down, and this will again start accumulating as I put in more work hours. Now, the max benefit year accrual, because 1 hour worked for every 30 hours, or 1 hour received for every 30 hours worked, if we work the full year, the 2080 hours, that's going to come out to around 69 hours of sick time. And we don't want that. We want that to stop at whatever our company designation is or state designation, which is usually 40 hours. And then we're going to go ahead and select save. So that's all we really need for this, because we're encompassing the length of employment that an employee have and the fact that this isn't going to change. Now, this could be different, and maybe your sick time is accumulated per pay period, like you've seen us do with the PTO time. And in that case, you would follow those guidelines to set up your sick. Or maybe they even get more time based on how long they've worked there, and you would follow that. We wouldn't have used the 9999. We would have just done the time range for our first accumulator and then gone in and added others. And I'll just go ahead and click save, and then come down here and click save. Now, when we assign this to employees, we can assign multiple employees at once by clicking on assign employees. There's nobody in my list. That's because I haven't selected anything, but I just click filter with all of these wide open, and that brings all of my employees to view. So I can go ahead and select the employees that I want for this for the accrual rule. and click confirm. Are you sure? And I click OK. Employee is assigned successfully. Now, you could go to employee and employee details, find the specific employee, and assign their PTO plan manually from here, and then save. Once they're assigned to their plan, if you want to give them a balance, you would then click Edit and PTO Banks, and you would be able to assign them whatever balance you needed to put forward if that were the case. Now, the other area that's important to think about here, especially if you're using HR, is going to be the default profile. So I go to Employees and Default Profiles. I have a few default profiles here. If we look at our 1099, where's their PTO? They just get regular PTO. Whereas, let's look at John's people. I don't know if I have people. We'll look at Bobby's people. I click Edit, and he's got the YP PTO plan. So when you add an employee into HR, you're going to choose whatever their default profile is based on what you have set up, and it will automatically assign them to the PTO plan for that particular default profile. If this is something new and it really doesn't cover any of your other default profiles, you can go to our quick tutorials or our configuration tutorial on adding a default profile to see how that's done. But basically, quickly, we can copy, let's say, John's people, give it a new name, and then on the PTO plan, select the one that we just added, and then save. And that adds our new default profile, and we're done. So that covers PTO plan accruals. Thank you for watching.